So I think we'll get started. So my name's Don Crawford. I work at a company called Conversica. We did used to be Ava. That's exactly right. So there you go. That's been a few years ago. So we're going to talk. So we're a unique company in that it's artificial intelligence, and we handle leads. We work leads, engage with leads, which gives us a very different perspective of what happens in leads. And because we follow up on the leads, it gives us a lot of information. So where the typical dealership may work 400, 500, 600 leads in a month, we are approaching 5 million leads a year. And we get to see on both ends what's going on with the lead. So quite frankly, we are really digging into all the data that we have, and we're working with a couple of manufacturers to actually pull all this data of what is going on with leads, what actually is happening on both ends as they're asking for information, and then what happens after a dealer gets involved with that lead. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the three things around leads. You know, how soon they're going to buy, how hard it is to sell them, and then how able the average dealer is prepared to sell those leads. And we'll share with you our experience in dealing over 5 million internet leads for car dealers last year. And we're in other verticals, but we're going to talk about just the automotive sector of this. Now, this is going to be basically around if you're internet managers, internet marketing, around how to set up your CRM to take advantage of what we see is lead buying and how they actually integrate or how they engage with you. So a little bit about myself, my background. So I have been in the automotive industry since I sold that car new. Not that exact one, but I sold 77 Furies new. So I know there's probably maybe no one in this room even knows what that car is, but I've been around the car business a very long time. So I worked in retail for 17 years. I was at Reynolds & Reynolds for a little over 10 years, eBay Motors for some time, and then I've been with Conversica for several years. So I've been around, the automotive business now for over 35 years. Now, I remember when the whole internet place started. I mean, I was actually back when Al Gore started the whole thing. But I remember when I dealt with manufacturers, and initially when they gave us leads, we had 48 hours to get to a lead. And I remember them moving to 24 hours, and we literally could not figure out how to do it. We thought, there's no way we'll get to a lead within 24 hours. It was too big a jump. And look at where we are today. So what we're going to talk about is what we learned from working with millions and millions of leads. And basically, we're talking about how soon, and the effort and the able. And it's how soon a lead will buy. And we'll talk about what we've been able to dig out of the information and give you the insight as to how soon leads buy coming from what avenues. And then we're going to talk about how much effort it will take to get those leads to buy. And then we're going to talk about how able dealers are to be able to respond to those leads. And again, the information that we've captured out of all of these millions of leads. So we're going to talk about how soon first. So how soon actually breaks down, like, again, I'm dating myself. I bet almost no one here even knows who this is. So Monty Hall. So it's going to be like one or two people. Everybody else in this room has no clue who Monty Hall is. So Monty Hall used to give you 3 different doors. And essentially we can break leads down into 3 different categories of millions of leads. We actually were able to break them down. So we're going to talk about each one, and then how, if you're a BDC manager or a marketing manager, if you're dealing in digital, you can break your leads down into these 3 categories. And this is how they actually buy. And so the first one we're going to talk about is the action taker. So the action taker, we get. This is the lead that is going to come through your website. It's going to come through chat. And here are the statistics on these leads. 56%, and this will be available for you guys to get the whole piece. 56% engaged in the first 2 weeks. 9% engaged after week 3. So they wouldn't even have a conversation or would not respond to you until after 3 weeks. They are most likely to go to a dealer's website or chat. They take 7+ engagements to get an appointment. And 18% of your total leads that you get are what we consider action taker. So those are going to be your best leads. And we all sort of get that. We know that if a lead comes to our website, if they actually pick a particular car, they're the leads who have settled in and the most likely to make a decision. But what was interesting is that 9% of those leads never talk to you until after week 3. And typically the average dealership, again, I get a chance to go all over the country and visit. I handle the top 100 dealer groups, and I go visit them. We sort of are creatures of, even though the CRMs are set up to work 6 months out, we really think about a couple of weeks. After that, it gets tough to stay focused on those leads. But in this case, still 9% won't even respond for 3 weeks. The next lead that we'll talk about is the thinker lead. So these are the thinkers. Now, these are, again, where they come from, where these leads actually get to your store are important. So the first leads, they were coming through your actual website, they were actually coming through your chat. The second leads, so when they come through these third-party providers, when they come through an Edmunds or a TrueCar, here's how it works. The thinker leads, so 47% engaged in 2 weeks, 17% waited for after 3 weeks. So even though they came through those sites, you would not hear from them. You could not get them to respond until after 3 weeks. More likely to go to research sites, information, and reviews. And it takes 13 plus engagement to get an appointment. And 59% of your leads are thinker leads. And we'll cover this a little more in depth. The last one is researcher leads. So 42% engaged in 2 weeks, but look at this next number. 28% never talked to you, never said a thing after you first got the lead until after 3 weeks. Now, these are the leads that are coming through manufacturer sites. A lot of times, these are the manufacturer third-party leads, hand-raiser leads. We sort of know what those leads are. We recognize that they're not as likely to make a decision to buy something, but what's interesting about them is a lot of them responded, but it took weeks before their first response came in. And very few dealers in their CRM are prepared to wait weeks and weeks for someone to make the first response. And this is an idea of how we should be looking at setting up our CRMs and what our expectations should be from those leads. Does that make sense? So, by the way, who here has really looked at the way that they're dealing with CRM or with their leads and have it set up to where the concentration is, we all have that, I think, right up front, the first couple of weeks, where we're doing emails, we're doing phone calls, we're doing whatever we can to make the deal. But have we looked at your leads and thought, okay, where's the next sweet spot? What section? Is it 3 weeks out? Is it 4 weeks? Or do we just continue on with what the CRM is? We wait 7 days, we wait another 2 weeks. Have you ever looked at what the second sweet spot of where the person is most likely to engage with you to make an appointment? Has anybody thought through that process yet or looked at that? Here? Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk to you, hopefully help you out with that. Now, a lot of you are going to be using lead scoring. So we looked at lead scoring to try to understand this. And this is sort of a diagram of what you see, how the leads come in. They're coming in from mobile and websites and different sites. And then different lead scoring companies will take that information. They're going to add in to figure out, is their car paid off? What kind of income do they have? What's their credit score? A lot of those things. And then they'll rate those leads and send them to you. We actually looked at it that way. And then we went backwards and looked at, actually, we could determine from where the lead came into you, what they were most likely to do. So without having to actually figure out how to score the lead, we could just tell if the lead came from a manufacturer site, it was most likely to do this. If a lead came through my chat, it was more likely to do that. So it didn't really matter what the score was. We're trying to figure out what is the most opportunity we could get. Not closing ratios. That's something we'll cover a little bit later. We're trying to figure out how to give your dealerships the most opportunity. And once you understand how a lead is thinking, where they come into your store is going to base their actions based on how they enter your dealership. So again, if they're entering through a chat room, they're thinking one thing. If they're entering in through the manufacturer site as a hand raiser lead, they're thinking something completely different. So knowing what those statistics are on millions of leads gives us an idea of how we need to work those leads. So does that make sense? So we respectfully disagree on that. So let me tell you what the sweet spot is. So we figured out the 2 sweet spots. If you're in the BDC marketing, if you're actually working in the internet department, this is what your CRM should be looking at. So the first sweet spot we all get. This is what we've been doing now for 30 years. And we all get that those first 14 days, that's that action taker. That's where they're sitting. And we're good at this. This is where we know our salesmen, we're doing the emails, we're following up as managers. If we're internet managers or sales managers, those people are front of mind. Then the next part that really falls off is those thinkers. All of a sudden, they're not happening for a week, week and a half, 2 weeks, and they're out 3 weeks. But where the biggest part is the researcher. The researcher is way out there, is way out after 3 weeks. So basically, your CRM should be set up to do two things. We already have the first part, which is that very first sweet spot, which is that first 14 days. It's out there in that 4 to 5 weeks. Those are the next biggest sweet spot. So what we should be doing is thinking of a CRM and the messaging is two different spots. The first 14 days, which we already have dialed in, but then we should be thinking that the next heavy part that we should market to our people is in week 4 and 5. That ends up being, when we've looked at 5 million leads, they were the most responsive in that area. So when you go back looking at your CRM, it shouldn't be linear. It shouldn't be one after another after another. What we should do is ramp up and understand that we're going to get the second most responses you're going to get from every lead is going to be in week 4 and 5. And start thinking about that section as being our biggest ability to sell those cars. And that encompasses all of the researchers and the thinkers, the people they're that far out in the buying cycle. Does that make sense? Or can you look at, see how, from a CRM perspective, you could actually set that up to actually take advantage of that week 4 and 5? And your messaging should actually be different, because what you actually have in that part is somebody who's thinking to themselves, when you initially got that first lead was, okay, I'm doing the research, I'm getting started. Okay, but I'm weeks away. And it turns out that week 4 and 5 was their first response. And we've got to get them to respond before we can make an appointment. That engagement isn't going to happen until that many days out. So start looking. If you start setting up an up ramp into week 4 and at 5 and 6, that you're actually reaching out and start doing more heavy emails, more reaching out, more phone calls, you'll pick up additional sales, because that's when the customer is most likely to respond and help set up an appointment. It's not about closing the car, it's about how many people can I get to the showroom. If I'm in marketing, if you're the internet manager, if you're a marketing manager, our job is to get as many opportunities as our dealership can happen. And that's the second sweet spot. And that's what we really wanted to be able to talk to you about, that with millions of leads, where's the second place that we can market to? So now let's talk about how hard it is. This is where it gets a little more complicated, because now how do I set up a CRM to take advantage? How difficult is this for me to ramp up my dealership to actually take advantage of the second sweet spot that a dealership will have, which is that week 4 or 5. The question is, how much focus can we put on it? Can I take a salesperson, where they're excited the first 2 weeks and go, okay, here's a lead that's 5 weeks old. This is the second best shot we're ever going to get on that lead. Now is the time for us to focus. And really it's a question of how we present it back to our dealership. Setting up our CRMs to take advantage of that second sweet spot, that is where we should have people ready to understand that this is the most likely time they're going to respond. If they haven't responded in the first 3 weeks, that's when they're going to respond. Always going for that appointment, getting the person into the store so you can make the sale. Now let's look at some statistics on this. And when you look at, these are how many emails. Now this is one manufacturer. Now I've hidden some of the data, but what you actually have, and I'm going to walk a little bit on this, and I won't read every one of these numbers, but take a look, it's kind of interesting. So this is 2,082,000 leads that we handled for one manufacturer. And up here on the left are the manufacturers. These are different. So a subscription, a manufacturer third party, subscription, and then the websites. So you can see how many leads we actually worked going through this. But what you see is interesting is look down at the dealer's website. We only took, and this was messages to appointment. Messages to appointment. So from a dealer's website, it only took 7. But when you look up here to the top of the screen, what you're seeing is, this is how many messages, now you start going out to that, in that 4 and 5 week, 17 to 25 messages it takes to get the response and get the appointment. Now this shouldn't be linear. Again, it's not one every 3 days. What you're looking at is this hoop. It's this 2 weeks, let's get those leads, and then week 4 and 5, it's almost, you need to be as aggressive as you were in week 1 and 2, in week 4 and 5. Because look at the difference. Now all of a sudden you have to send out, during that period, you've got to triple the amount of engagements to get that lead to respond. And if you take a look, I mean, that is from, so the average dealer here, if you're looking at 10, 12,000 leads a year, this is what you can look at when you look at 2 million leads. This is the data that we're able to get. And again, this manufacturer is looking at it themselves going, okay, this tells us a whole different way to look at the way human nature works. So in human nature, it isn't that a customer starts out by being excited and gets less excited. They start out by being excited by a car in the first couple of weeks, and then it slows down as they gather data, then it picks back up again in week 4 and 5. And this is what this shows here. Phone calls, messages, so the idea of your CRM should be, you probably have it dialed in exactly right now for the first 2 weeks. And when I'm saying the first 2 weeks, when that first lead comes in, the combination of emails and phone calls that you do to that lead, you should almost replicate that exact process for that lead that doesn't respond in week 4 and 5. Because the odds are that person is going to now respond to you that didn't respond initially. So don't, just because, and what happens is that they don't respond in the first couple of weeks, we assume it's a dead lead. We mark it dead. But the next biggest sweet spot is so far out, we can't even think that. We can't even really think, week 4 and 5. That's too far out in the car business. Yet our statistics show us that spot is so good that literally 25%, you could pick up 25% more leads by figuring out on your CRM how to actually replicate that first 2 weeks and move it back into week 5 and 6. Because that's about when they're going to re-engage with you. Or now they're going to actually answer your email so that you can set up an appointment. But yeah, so you want to actually replicate as much work as you did in the first 2 weeks and push it out there again, and you're just going after that customer with the same amount of effort. So here's the next thing that's kind of interesting. So when we look at the data, we looked at, now that we know that leads coming into your own sites, chat and actually into your own site, they have the highest response rate. The next easy question, and of course I'm asking this, we already know what the answer is going to be. So leads from a dealer site followed up more or less. So the best leads, and we all know they're the best leads, the follow-up or the ability for a salesman to actually, because we actually track 2 things. We track and we ask every single lead, did the salesperson get you the information that you required 48 hours after the lead has provided all the information for a salesperson to talk? And this is what we were able to actually figure out. So again, here are the actual, now you can actually see. So this is 800, so you can look through, there's another 2 million leads right here. And we've broken them down. Here's 500,000 TrueCar leads. And if you look down there, there's some 634,000 manufacturer leads and dealers' website leads. So on the far right corner is the follow-up percentage. What it turns out is that the best leads that you have, and that we've all known about, have the lowest follow-up. And what ended up being is TrueCar ended up having the highest follow-up. A lot of it has to do with our perception. Our perception is that a TrueCar lead is ready to buy, and so we follow up at the highest amount, at 89%, and yet dealers' website, who have the lowest amount to make an appointment, had the lowest amount of follow-up. They're the least exciting. And it's the complete opposite of what we should be doing. Again, when you look at millions of leads, one of the things that we should know is that we only have to touch that customer 7 times to get an appointment. If it's a dealer coming through the dealer's website, it has the least amount of salesman's attention. So we need to focus more on that because it's not as exciting. So we need to pay more attention on that. Does that make?
So when does that get a hold of it sooner?
Yep.
Average also affect that percentage?
We took that into effect.
You've already taken
Yep. Took it into account, yes. Took it into account, and it's, so by asking each lead, did you get the information? So in this case, 29% of the leads that came through a dealer's chat or his own website said, I never heard from a salesman back. Yet, only 11%, so in this case, 29% never heard. At TrueCar, 11% didn't hear back. So it was a huge number. Out of 833,000, 29% of those people said, I never heard from anybody 2 days later. Now, that's customers' perception. Doesn't mean it's right, but it's what their answer was to that question. I never heard from anybody. I didn't get my information. So it's completely reversed. Our salesmen are more excited about the least excitable leads. They get the ones that they should be excited about, the ones that come through chat and through our own website. Those are the ones they should be the most excited because they're the quickest to get to an appointment. Yet the numbers actually tell us what is really happening out in dealerships today. So you can see we actually looked at 833,000 dealer website leads and managed it. Yes? Yeah. Seven, right. Correct. Took 7, but took 25 at some of these. And then we looked at two stats. How many does it take to get to an appointment? And then which ones got the most? And then we asked the follow-up question was, did you get all the information? And it turns out the one that's the easiest to get the appointment had the most amount, never heard back. Which is the complete opposite of what you would think. You would think the ones that got the 7, I would be all over them. But it ends up that it's twice as much. We spent twice as much time trying to get a hold of the leads that we spent the most amount of time trying to get a hold of. Again, it's the perception of what is a sale. We're chasing. So a lot of times we chase the wrong things. We think like in our business, a lot of times we buy thinking on closing ratios instead of engagement. And engagement is much higher. Engagement is much more important for a dealer because engagement equates to opportunity. And what we're trying to look for is opportunity. And we think about it differently. Yes?
So how much of a leeway is there based on customer perception unless you guys are tracking because
I'm going to cover that. I'm going to cover exactly what breaks down in the customer's perception.
we get literally, let's say we get 10 Conversica leads in a day.
Mm-hmm.
3 of them will say I never heard from a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I go back and look at CRM and sure enough this person's been talking to us.
I'm going to cover exactly what that means.
So many different people, they don't know who they're talking to.
That's a good point. And we'll.
I would venture to say 20% are probably talking to and not mention anybody.
Exactly, and there's a reason for that. We'll actually cover exactly what that stat is because we've actually done the analysis on that also. So what we're trying to actually show everybody here is it doesn't really matter what CRM tool you're on. They come out of the box pretty much one way. It's really this you start here and it gets down very quickly, but that's not really what it should have been designed. And once we were able to look at millions of leads, we went and figured out that it's this really a roller coaster effect of leads are hot, then they drop off, then they get hot again, and we're not geared up for that. And so that's what our thought process should be, looking at the way we set up our departments to take advantage of that second sweet spot, and also internally what we get excited about as what's the real game. If the real game is chasing that lead, because we look at in a true car, that person has made, a true car person has made a decision to buy a car is our perception, yet we end up having to spend 3 times more to chase that lead down than the lead that most likely to get an appointment, which is our own leads that come out of our website, because we're not as excited about that. So it's a question of what your perception is. And each one of us should go back and look at it and look at our own stats and go, okay, what are we doing between week 4, 5, and 6 out there? And also, what's our perception about leads, in our own internal leads? The easiest leads for us to get, every website, we even stopped talking about that because internally we all know that a lead comes through our chat or comes through our website is the best because they picked a car. Yet what it shows, what the reality shows is we're least likely to follow up with that lead with the information that they requested. So again, we talk about, so a quarter of the leads are waiting after 4 weeks before they respond. So the question is, how do you set up your processes? I think we talked a little bit about that, but hopefully everybody's thinking about, okay, now I need to go home and think about, what is my setup? What is the schedule of emails and calls, and how can I take advantage of that where I've spent, the first 10 days or so, I'm aggressively going after them, and then I have a break of a couple of weeks, and instead of marking the lead dead, it's just we need to figure out that, okay, it's really alive again back in week 4 and 5, and they're ready for that second calls. And it could be some combination of emails and calls, but that's when they're most likely to be back in the market again. And we generally have marked them dead. and moved on to the next set of leads. But there's another whole group right there that want to do something. So it's all about re-engaging your leads and figuring out internally what that means to you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the able part. So the question is how able, and we're going to cover your information right here. So we're going to talk about the CRM obstacle course. So this will shock you that of all the leads that we did, that we manage, in the millions of leads, 27% of all the leads respond to us. I never got contacted in 48 hours. And now these are the leads that have given not just their phone number, but have confirmed a phone number, confirmed an email address. And so the national average is 27%. So 5 million, a little over 5 million leads last year in automotive, 27% respond, I never heard from anybody. But it's perception. Now we all know what perception is. If that's the customer's perception, that's reality to them. But okay, but how do we solve that? How is that possible? Because since I deal with dealers all day and I say, okay, if I ask a lead who's confirmed their email, gave you the exact phone number, and then said, call me at 4 o'clock, and we ask them 2 days later, did anyone call them? What are the odds that that lead would say, I never heard from anybody? And there's probably no one in this room that would say, it's not. It's not. My CRM tells me it's done. It's going to happen. We have all the processes set up. Yet, so I work with all the big dealer groups. It's 27%. And I got a lot of them that are way higher than that. Yes?
How much is that attributed to spam and things like that?
Thank you for asking that question. We're going to talk about that. So here's what it looks like. So we call them leads at risk. So a lead at risk is a lead who has provided you all the information, yet their response is, I never heard from anyone, or I didn't get my information. So it breaks down into 3 areas. So 40% of that number is human error. It's real process issues in our stores. So of that number, you can affect 40% of the 27%. That is where you actually have, and the funny thing is, we've set the auto industry in a weird area. So how many of you guys have a sales staff that works 9 to 3, 3 to 9, and if you work the morning shift, the next day you don't come on until the evening shift? Do they still do shift work like that because you're working retail hours? So the funny thing is, you can actually, a lot of times we should look at process issues, because it's possible that somebody got a lead in the morning on one day, and they don't get to the evening the next day, and this is after a person responds. And although it fits our schedule, it doesn't fit the customer's schedule. So the customer's perception is, I'm not getting my information, it's not working out based on the schedule of having to be a retail shop. So 40% of it is process. That's the thing that you independently have to look at your own stores and go, okay, how do we make sure that we're getting to all customers? Because it's different with everyone here. And that's the human element of it. The next 2 pieces, the other 20% you do have. This is another part, dealer confusion. So when we did our study of customers and we called the leads to ask them, you brought up a good point, because here's what happens. The person says, I never heard from anyone. Yet you look in your CRM and you see where your salesman's called them twice, had great conversations, yet the customer's perception is, I did not hear. I never heard from that person. Here's what we found out. 1 in 5 customers is confused as to who you are, which was a huge number. And it's because of this. We know who we are. The customer hears ABC Toyota, Davis Toyota, Main Street Toyota. We're proud of ABC and Main Street. The customer heard Toyota, Toyota, Toyota. And they got multiple emails, multiple responses. They can't keep track of who they were talking to. Now, there's kind of an easy way to fix that. Because what we're proud of is not sustainable in the consumer's mind. So ABC Motors Toyota is not as important as ABC Toyota, I'm the Toyota dealership over by the mall. You need to take what your description is and solidify it somewhere hard so the customer can absorb that. Because they won't absorb, because they don't meet you, it's all on the internet, it's too flat. They need to figure out who you are and what is different about yours than the other email I'm getting from other stores. So what happens is 1 out of 5 people answer, I never heard from anybody. It's because they sent that lead to 3 or 4 Toyota stores or Ford stores, and all of a sudden people are responding, and they can't keep track of which store gave them the information, which didn't. But you're not getting credit for it. Which again, their perception means you're not winning that deal. So you have to figure out how to change the customer's point of view as to what he thinks about you and how he can remember you. And it's not your name. You have to find another way to address that. We find it's easier to address it by using a geography, some point of geography that the customer would know. And each of you would know your own spot. Sort of think through that process. But it ended up being a way bigger number than we thought, that 1 out of 5 customers was confused as to who they were speaking to. That makes sense to anyone? Anyone ever uncovered that themselves? Or is anybody doing something about that themselves in their department to try to cover that, or have they encountered that before? I know you actually brought it up, saying this is one of the things we're finding. We're seeing that. There you go. Each store has to have their own thing, but the name was the least rememberable to the consumer. The consumer remembered the manufacturer, but the name was the least thing that they remembered, which meant that we had to find a different way because they don't visit your store, they don't remember that you had a fountain, they don't remember you had a Starbucks, so they're seeing it in a very flat space. So the manufacturer's name that they got, but what your name was, unless it was so unique, a Longo may have some benefit there. But since we're not a Longo, and most of us are not, we have to figure out a different way to solidify the name to the consumer. The last piece was 40% was spam. This one you don't really have a lot of control over, other than to find out that's how big the issue is. So you go to these classes, and I'll be at NAD again, and you hear about these huge deliverability, 97, 98%. We find spam issue on average is almost 40%. And you don't know it. And you'll have no idea what your spam issue is, because here's what happens. The consumer sends you a lead. Your salesperson responds. It goes into a spam filter. The consumer says, that dealership doesn't care, I never heard from them. Your salesperson thinks, that customer wasn't really interested, I never heard back. And you don't know that the information just passed in that one way. Because since there's no other response, there's no other way, and if it's spam, there's nothing in the CRM you can send them to get, it's going to keep dropping in the spam folder. So there's a couple of ways that you can actually handle this differently. In the CRMs, everything that we get excited about here is exactly the kind of things that Google and Yahoo are not that excited about. They're not that excited about links and videos and pictures. That's the kind of thing they expect, they think it's going to be spam. So they're not really looking at it like that. So you really need to think about, okay, if we're providing information, if somebody has inquired information and we've sent it, how, now I know there's open rates and click rates, but I can tell you right now, there's nobody in this room that thought that 40% of the stuff that they're sending is going into a spam folder. Yet that's what we've seen looking at 5 million emails. And it's what we get when we ask the customer's perception. Did you get the information? I never got anything. There's no other answer other than it ended up being spam. And when we told them to look in the spam folder, now the funny thing is, if you try to warn them up front, it doesn't help. Warning them up front that it might go in the spam folder did nothing for that number. So it ends up that one of the best practices that you could do is each of you is to come up with a controlled Gmail account that you never use for anything other than testing, did the information get there? That's it. But you don't put a logo, you don't put a link, you need to control it. And here's where you use it. If someone has asked for information and you're not getting a response, you should control this. Again, this is one of these things that it will be very easy for you to start putting attachments and then you're done. You use it, you keep, and you want to open it for ABC Toyota Gmail account. Just pick one, 1A. If there'll probably be ones already set up. But you use it just to make sure. If you haven't heard from a consumer, somebody asked for information, they seem interested. You got to think about how to use this, and you haven't heard from them. It would not be a bad idea to use a Gmail and just say, because of the information we sent you, it may have gone in your spam folder. If you could just let me know that you got it, I'd appreciate it. Just as a test to make sure that that's likely to get through, where anything that you have with links and all that is likely not to. You're going to be shocked at how often the information does not get to the consumer. Again, we do it, and we did it millions of times, and so we see what that number is. Again, we think that the consumer's not getting and not interested. And it's a huge number that are interested. And their perception of your dealership is, you guys don't really care about the business. So it's an extra step, but it's easy to do. You can automate it, make it easy, just get it ready to go. And just a day or so after you've sent the information, if you're using your CRM, just send a Gmail reminder just to say, hey, I'm sending this from my personal account to make sure you got the information we sent you. Because the information may have gone into your spam folder. And you'll be shocked at how many times. Yes?
You say 40% was lost to spam. Is that an aggregate between the emails that were sent out by the Conversica system with the dealer, or just the dealer emails?
Just dealer CRM information that went out. So 40% was the number that we were able to say that the consumer responded in a way that said, I did not get my information, yet when we looked into the CRM, it actually showed the information going out. So we took those two stats to come up with the 40%. So there was actually no, outside of a customer being confused. And this was only email. So this wasn't a customer that we had a phone call. This was, we could see it in the CRM saying it went out. Whether it said open or not was almost irrelevant, because what we wanted the consumer to say was, I never got the information. And that's how we combined those two numbers. So if the customer's perception is, I never got anything, and the CRM is saying we sent it, we're going to assume it's a spam issue.
So what we do is we actually, our guys will send an email to our CRM, and then if they don't get a response, they copy paste it into our Outlook, and then they send it to Outlook, and they're able to get much more response.
Now, you see, that's actually right. Now, you don't want to ever, again, you got to be careful with the links and stuff, but it's more likely to go through. But that's it. What you've uncovered is something that we saw with millions of leads. The customer's perception was, when they were saying that, and we could look in the CRM, it was the obvious answer. It's just getting stuck there. And sure enough, when you follow up like that, you get people that go, yes, that's where it was. I didn't know it was there. But you're uncovering in this room, around your peers, because maybe other people are doing that. How many people are doing that today? Two or three people. But so that just shows you that a couple of people went, wait a minute, this is interesting. How come people aren't responding? Realizing I need to find another way to try to get to those customers. So then let's talk about perception versus reality. This will be as we're closing this up. So what we've talked about initially is thinking about our leads a little bit different, not marking them dead too soon, giving them second life, and where we need to give them second life, and then how leads perceive us, how we're able to take advantage of our marketing as far as what can we control. We can control our processes. We can control how we communicate to leads about who we are so they remember us. That accounts for 60%. And then by using what people here in the audience have done and what we're talking about, create another account to follow up on the 40% spam. You can't control the spam, but it gives you an extra opportunity, an extra at-bat with that customer that you've done everything right, but the consumer's perception is you haven't. So we're trying to overcome those things. The last part that we'll talk about is our perception about leads and how we look at, my pet peeve is closing ratios. So closing ratios against opportunities. I look at opportunities to be way more important than closing ratios, yet our industry and our dealerships are based on closing ratios. So for me, closing ratios are like looking at a lottery ticket from yesterday and playing the same numbers today, saying, well, it hit yesterday, it must hit today. And I have to tell you, it doesn't work that way. Because the same 100 leads that I give to everyone in this deal, if I had the same 100 leads and I gave them to every dealership here, you would have a different closing ratio for those leads. Because there's so many different pieces that are involved in the close that you can't replicate it. As a matter of fact, if you had the same number of leads, not the same number, but the exact same leads you had last month, this month you would close differently. So if that's the case, what does closing ratio really tell us? It really doesn't tell us anything. What we really need to do as marketing managers is figure out opportunity. The closing ratio will take care of itself by having a customer come to the dealership and then all the other things that are involved with it. Do I have the right car? Is the salesman and the customer a right fit? Is the trade-in worth the money this week that it wasn't worth last week? I would say there's a certain diesel car this week that wasn't worth as much as it was 2 weeks ago. So everything changes. And the question is, when we're looking at leads and looking at engagements, we should be thinking that engagement rates are more valuable than closing rates. So as we're thinking, an engagement rate is forward. I want to get as many people into my dealership. So when you're looking at third-party providers, as marketing managers, we should be trying to figure out how many feet can they put in my dealership, not what my closing rate, not looking backwards at my closing ratio to figure out who to buy. Does that make sense? We look at this the wrong way. And this is one of these things that we've uncovered again. When you look at millions of leads, you realize that closing ratio in the same stores, since it changes. And since I can see every third-party lead provider, I see all their closing ratios all over the place from one store to the next. And I realize it has nothing to do with the lead provider. It had to do with the store. So in my case, I want to figure out from each lead what percentage of them actually respond. Because for me, a $20 lead that has a 50% engagement really costs me $30. It's 20 because I'm only getting half of them. So when you start, figuring out, if you actually figure out what your actual cost is per lead, it's based on engagement rate, not on close rate. Thinking that the more people I can get into my dealership, actually in the end, the better the opportunity will be for my store. When I look at this, I always think of this. Engagement against close rate, engagement trumps close rate. So what we learned. First 14 days are the most important. I don't know that I'm teaching anybody anything new there. We pretty much have got that. I mean, you've been in the car business any length of time, we get the first 14 days. So that one I'll give you that you already know. The second one, weeks 5 and 6. It's the second biggest sweet spot that you're going to find, and it's probably the most underutilized. As a matter of fact, it ends up, I can't tell you how many dealers we work with that already have those leads marked dead, closed, and have moved on, yet there is a tremendous amount of benefit for going backwards and re-engaging with those leads in that time period. That's when they're back in the market. The average store, a quarter of your leads won't respond to you then. So if you're getting 500 leads, basically 125 won't even talk to you until week 4 and 5. And so if you have 500 leads next month, you basically can take your 500 from this and 125 from last month that are back in the market this month. So you have 125 leads rolling that you're missing. So you can extrapolate what that number comes down to, how many sales you're missing by not following up with those leads and marking them dead and moving on. And then the last thing is don't worry about close rate, but opportunity based on engagement. Look for engagement to be one of the strongest things that you can do for your dealership from a marketing or a digital manager's perspective. Give your dealership the most opportunities. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. So it's interesting because dealers measure it differently. We measure it one way, but when I talk to dealer groups, they have a different term for it. So another term is volley. So engagement is not. So it's funny when I talk to manufacturers, they have a bad term for it. So they have a stop the clock. They think that's engagement. So I can tell them right now. So if I got down on, I have a girlfriend. If I get down on my knee and propose to her, I'm not engaged. She's got to say yes. So it's not what I say. It's getting her to respond. So engagement is the lead comes in, we reach out, and you get a response. It doesn't matter whether you ask a question, provide information. You're not engaged. So stopping the clock, getting there first doesn't win. It's getting the lead to talk back. So engagement to us is a volley, is a complete lead in, get them information, get a response back. So it's a full engagement for us. Now, how you can measure that? There's a lot of ways to measure. A lot of CRM tools can measure. A lot of people don't think about that's a true engagement. Being the first one there with the information, a lot of times we provide it and then we don't ever hear from the lead. We never really had anything, so we don't know how to even measure that. So for me, I'm trying to measure two things. Leads, and I can tell you this, of millions of leads, 51% engaged. That's the overall of 5 million leads, basically a little more than 50%. We have them fall into two buckets. We find leads do one of two things. Leads that have intent and leads that have interest. A lead that has intent, when you provide them information and you start trying to figure out, trying to get them in, will respond to you. Those are leads that will engage. A lead that has interest is a lead that sends information and you never hear from them again. And you cover the spam issues and what that was is somebody, I didn't realize that I was going to hit this button and somebody was going to respond. I'm 2 years away. So that's the interest lead. You want to figure out who the intent leads are? Those are the ones that are engaging with you. That's how we count engagement, both ways. Yes? All of them have phone numbers? No. No, we didn't find any significant difference whether someone put a phone number or not. A customer that was engaged or a lead that was engaged was just as likely to do the two-way engagement or the two-way emails with you. If you continue down the path, we got the communication to the appointment stage. We're looking, so whether you're doing it by only phone number or like a lot of leads, so they don't give you that, if you keep communicating and giving the information, we counted the end of this discussion as the appointment point. Now, whether they made the appointment, we didn't follow that up, but we got to the place where they said, we have an appointment now, we're going to come in. We figure that's about as good as you can get. After that, it's the management and the salesman staff to figure out the rest of that part. Yes? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't doubt that. So there's a couple of things around texting. It's obviously, I think everyone is looking at that. I mean, and I think everyone here also knows of one of the big dealer groups that had some issues not too long ago. But I'm a consumer. This is not something that the genie's out of the bottle. So we're heading down the path of texting. I think that's in the evolution. I think that's exactly the next step that everyone. This whole discussion in communication will just move naturally over to include texting. We don't do texting yet. I certainly agree with you. I think that texting makes more sense. And anything that gets the consumer, the lead, to engage makes sense to me. And that's just the natural evolution. Because what you're really trying to do is, the lead is great, the response is better. Give me that, I want that total engagement with that customer. If I can engage them, I can get them in, because if they don't, I can't get the appointment, I can't get them in the store. But I agree with you. I think that's where we're going to be heading. Any other questions? Yes? Well, looking at, well, it is interesting. So if you look at it two ways. If you look at 5 million, and actually we've looked at now 15, 18 million leads over 5, 6, 7 years, you can see a third-party provider and go that percentage across 1 million leads. So we can come up with that. But each individual dealer and where they're sitting could be completely different. But when you aggregate, you come up with a statistical number across 1 million leads. You can see that number, but it obviously can change. As managers, one of our things should be to go and say what it works in our area. And we should always be trying to raise engagement rates in our store. And by doing that, if we track engagement rates by lead provider, we should be taking our low engagement lead providers, move them to the side, and keep looking to raise that number. If we have a set number of dollars to spend, if I'm going to spend, I'm throwing a number out there, $20 a lead, by knowing what your engagement rate, that gives you the true cost of that lead, and then you can start to figure out, okay, how for the same dollars can I get more people to respond for the same marketing dollars to get more people into my dealership? So that's how we look at it. Yes, we can see the exact number. Each store obviously is different, and I see it East Coast, West Coast, small store, big store, they can be all over the place. And so what I would say is where you sit is more important from a national standpoint. But certainly the manufacturers are now looking at our data going, okay, how does this work nationally? What kind of information can I give my dealer body that says you're more likely to get a higher engagement here than here, and ultimately what is that worth to everyone? Any other questions? No, it was so those two were they accounted for such a large percentage. But what was really interesting is it was the week 4 and 5 is so dramatic. It was such a big spike that we spent quite a lot of time doing the research and looking at how big that number really was. And so it ends up being like 27, 28, 29% of your leads won't respond into that time period. And so if you look at what your store is and how you're set up, those leads have all generally always been marked dead and moved on. So one of the things that we were able to do is go backwards into dealerships' CRM and look at all the dead leads and see when those people started to engage again. And then we reached out ourselves into that time period, and we saw that big spike. So it ended up by breaking the leads down into what we could see which category and basing on where those leads actually came into the dealership, whether it was third party, whether it was manufacturer, or whether it was through your own website. We were able to determine what part of the cycle they were really in. So it'll be interesting when you guys go back and look at how your CRM set up and go, okay, well now instead of marking them dead, we're just going to have a slow period, and then we're going to, just as much as we did in the first period, go right back after them to bring those people back into the fold. It'd be interesting to see what your results are. I mean, we've done this with some pilot stores, and we've had phenomenal results. Actually, they were kind of shocked that the people would respond. But it's where they are mentally. Any other questions?
I didn't see a place to scan your badge.
Yeah. So my email address is right there. donc@Conversica. So if you email me, I will make sure that you have. I don't know why we didn't get that. Obviously, we have a booth down here. If you stop by, or after, you can, by all means, you can come by and get a card. We are giving away, Gloria, what are we giving away? An HP tablet, right. So if you, so between Gloria and I, we've got enough business cards, and then you guys can contact us. We'll be glad to give you a copy. I'm sure that it'll be available through Digital Dealer, this show, and because you'll want to look at these stats and actually get this stuff into your own, put it back at your marketing people, look at it yourself and try to figure out, okay, how does this work for our own store? Any other questions? Hey, thank you very much for showing up.